I want to share something that happened to me a couple of years ago. A whole mess of a situation that still makes my head spin every time I think about it. This all kicked off when I was 18, and I was living with my dad, Mark, and my stepmom, Tracy. My dad's been running his own paper supplies business for quite a while, and money was never really an issue for us. Even so, the events that went down had nothing to do with finances and everything to do with trust. Back then, I was studying for my driver's license test, which was only a few days away. Since I wanted to practice a bit, I took our family car out for a short drive around the neighborhood. Before doing that, I specifically asked my stepmom for permission. My dad had always been clear that as long as one parent said it was okay, I could use the car. Since Dad was at work, I went to Tracy, and she gave me the green light. The drive itself was nothing major. I was just circling the block, going slow, when out of nowhere, a drunk driver in a truck rear-ended me. It was a horrible crash. I was hurt pretty severely, enough to be completely bedridden for 3 months. My entire body ached, and I could barely move without feeling intense pain. It was the kind of accident you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. As if dealing with the physical agony wasn't bad enough, the real gut punch happened when my stepmom suddenly changed her story. She told my dad that I'd taken the car without any sort of permission, just to show off to my friends and look cool. She painted it like I had snuck out behind her back, which was absolutely false. I guess she claimed she overheard me scheming with my buddies, and that she'd supposedly warned me not to do it. According to her version, I ignored everything she said. You could imagine how I felt, confused, betrayed, and in a ton of pain from my injuries. My dad didn't even bother to get my side of the story. The minute Tracy told him I had stolen the car to impress friends, he kicked me out of the house. I still remember pleading with him, reminding him I could barely stand upright, let alone fend for myself. But he didn't budge. He insisted I was being a brat, and he wasn't going to let me hurt his wife with my so-called bad attitude. In hindsight, maybe I should have seen something like this coming. My stepmom had been around since I was about 4 years old. My biological mom, Lucinda, had bowed out early on. She signed away her parental rights and vanished. My dad was fully prepared to raise me alone. Then, after a few years, Dad started dating Tracy. When I was 7, they tied the knot. For most of my childhood, she was just kind of there. She didn't act motherly toward me, and I never really considered her a parental figure. We never clicked. We argued over tiny things, and even those trivial disagreements would blow up into major drama. She liked to play the victim, telling my dad I was disrespectful. I can't even recall how many times Dad sided with her by default. But I never, in my wildest imagination, thought she'd stoop to lying about me wrecking the car on purpose. And it clearly wasn't for money. Our car and medical bills were fully covered by insurance, and Dad's business was doing fine. So, as far as I can tell, Tracy just wanted me gone. So, there I was, 18 years old, barely able to walk or feed myself properly, and my dad forced me to move in with my grandparents, Alan and Barbara. I'll be honest, that hurt me more than words can describe. Dad and I had always been pretty close before Tracy came around. He used to be my world when I was little, especially since my biological mom wasn't involved. Suddenly, he was staring me down like I was nothing. His exact words were something like, "I'm done with your attitude. You need discipline." He told me that he couldn't keep hurting Tracy just because I couldn't behave. Everything in me wanted to scream, "Dad, I can't even get out of bed without help, and you believe this nonsense?" But it fell on deaf ears. By the time he ordered me out, I completely lost my temper, which didn't help matters. I called Tracy a liar, and a few worse words I regret now, though I was basically on the edge after her endless accusations. My meltdown only convinced Dad I was out of control, so he followed through and made me leave. My grandparents were a saving grace. They welcomed me with open arms, set me up in a comfortable room, and even hired a full-time nurse to care for me. I'd never felt so miserable, and yet so relieved at the same time. Miserable because my own dad had chosen my stepmom over me, relieved because Alan and Barbara genuinely cared. For the first month or two after the accident, I was still in rough shape. The doctor said I needed complete rest to let my body heal. And that was exactly what I did. Alan and Barbara tried multiple times to get my dad to come see me, but he always had an excuse. One day he was swamped at work. Another day he was exhausted. Weeks turned into over 2 months, and I never laid eyes on him once. Eventually, my grandparents had enough and confronted him about his behavior. That's when he finally admitted that he didn't plan on reconciling with me anytime soon, mostly because Tracy had given him an ultimatum: choose her or me. He chose her. He claimed I needed to learn to get along with people and quit being a difficult child. He said until I grew up, he couldn't see a place for me in his life. It's still painful to think about, but that was the moment I decided I was done with him. If he wanted nothing to do with me, fine, I'd survive without him. Fast forward to roughly 2 years later. Thanks to my grandparents' unwavering support, I got back on my feet, healed up, and even started college. It's not been a walk in the park, but at least I'm making progress in my life. Dad and Tracy? I'd heard practically nothing about them. No calls, no visits, nothing. I guess that was how we both wanted it. They lived their life. I lived mine. Then out of the blue, I got a text from Tracy, of all people. She told me that she and my dad planned to renew their wedding vows in a couple of weeks, and she wanted me to show up. Let me tell you, I was floored. I even wrote back something like, "Why on earth would you want me there?" She kept insisting I had to come, hinting that Dad was about to reach out to me personally to make it official. She claimed it was important because some of Dad's business associates would be attending, and these people all knew he had a daughter. If I was missing from a family event, it would raise eyebrows and possibly tarnish his reputation. She also tried spinning it as if Dad was genuinely eager to repair our relationship. But the tone of her texts didn't sound like someone offering an olive branch. It felt more like a threat, especially when she started saying she'd make sure I never inherited anything if I didn't attend. She basically called me an ungrateful brat and said my dad was showing me undeserved kindness by even wanting me there. My blood boiled. After that, I blocked her on my phone. I thought that would be the end of it. Well, not so fast. Tracy got around my phone block by emailing me. She reiterated that my presence was mandatory, claiming again that Dad was hoping I'd accept the invitation so he could make things right. But her attitude was still dripping with hostility. That was the last straw. I decided I was done being silent. I made a public post on social media detailing the entire story, how I'd been kicked out while bedridden, how my stepmom had lied about me sneaking out, how my dad never visited. I attached screenshots of her messages, too, just in case anyone thought I might be exaggerating. I made the post public, tagged both Dad and Tracy, plus a few of his work contacts I recognized from photos on his business website. It was a deliberate move, sure, but I was sick of the manipulative nonsense. They wanted to shine up their image for the vow renewal, so I figured the truth should be out there. I didn't expect anything major to come of it. Maybe a few people would read it, maybe some would sympathize with me, but that's it. Turns out, the backlash was bigger than I realized. My grandparents told me soon after that Dad was absolutely devastated. He'd been negotiating a huge merger with another office supplies company, and apparently my post made them question his integrity. Deals like that depend a lot on personal reputation and trust. Once the other side caught wind of how he'd kicked me out, plus the drama with my stepmom, they started backing away from the merger. Dad couldn't get them to return his calls, and it looked like the entire deal was about to collapse. My grandparents were furious with me for potentially wrecking my dad's professional future. They said I shouldn't have aired the family's dirty laundry in public, that I could have just ignored Tracy's messages and let it slide. They also argued the main instigator was my stepmom, not my dad, even though he'd certainly played a big part by believing her. And that's when guilt sank in for me. Did I go too far? I mean, I was just defending myself, but a lot of people got caught in the crossfire. A few days later, I felt compelled to remove the post. Something inside me knew that, while I didn't regret speaking my truth, I hadn't intended to jeopardize Dad's business deal. After all, I had zero clue about the merger when I made that public call out. So, I decided to unblock my dad's number and send him a text. It wasn't exactly an apology, but more of an explanation. I told him I'd been harboring these hurt feelings since he threw me out, especially since I was bedridden and it felt like the ultimate betrayal. Then, when Tracy tried to bully me into attending the vow renewal, mostly for show, I snapped. That's why I posted everything, pure frustration and pain. To my surprise, Dad actually responded. He told me it was all right, that he deserved it after everything he'd done. He said he didn't blame me for lashing out. I was stunned because I'd prepared myself for him to call me names or scold me again, but he didn't. Feeling unsettled, I asked my grandparents what was going on. They told me Dad had been regretting his actions for a while, how he'd chosen Tracy's word over mine without really investigating the truth, and how he'd felt too ashamed to approach me after the fact. According to them, he'd been mulling over ways to fix our relationship for months, but never gathered the courage. Now that my post had brought everything into the open, he figured he had no right to get angry at me when, from his perspective, he was the one who'd messed up first. My grandparents also revealed that the vow renewal wasn't supposed to be some big corporate event. It was meant to be a private ceremony with close friends and family. At least, that's how Dad described it. Apparently, Tracy lied to me about the business associates being there, probably to manipulate me into coming. Dad had found out the details of her deception after seeing the screenshots I'd shared. He confronted her about it, which led to a huge blowout. At this point, you'd think the story would end. But my grandparents encouraged me to talk to Dad in person. Plenty of folks online were telling me to maintain no contact, to keep away from him after what he'd done. I appreciated their concern, but I also knew I couldn't ignore this forever. I decided I wanted closure. I was tired of letting old wounds fester. I told my grandparents I was open to meeting Dad for a genuine conversation. Meanwhile, Dad's personal life was in total disarray. The vow renewal was obviously called off, and from what I heard, Dad and Tracy were arguing nonstop. She'd basically caused a massive rift between them by admitting she'd lied not just about the vow renewal event, but also about how my car accident went down 2 years ago. Dad was devastated, and it seemed like their marriage might be on the rocks. 2 days later, I finally sat down with Dad in my grandparents' living room. It was the first time we'd been in the same room since I was kicked out. The tension was thick, but Dad started off by apologizing, full stop. He said, "I failed you as a father. I don't deserve to even be sitting across from you after everything you've been through." He admitted that early on, he'd been a decent parent, especially when I was small, but the older I got, the more easily he let Tracy's manipulations cloud his judgment. He told me Tracy was a very smooth talker, and he'd had no reason to think she'd lie about something as serious as me stealing the car. It took him a few weeks after I left to start questioning her story. By then, he felt too ashamed to confront me or Alan and Barbara. He said he realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, but convinced himself it was too late to fix things. Turns out, Dad had already filed for divorce from Tracy. When I posted the screenshots, he confronted her about them, and she finally confessed she'd lied. There was no salvaging their marriage at that point. Dad told me he'd understand if I never wanted to speak to him again, but he'd be grateful if I chose to give him another chance. I told him I needed time to think. It's not so easy to just snap my fingers and forgive him for abandoning me. But at the end of the day, he's the only father I've known. I'm an adult now, living my own life, so there's no worry about me being dependent on him or vice versa. Maybe there's room for a second chance. I'm leaning toward trying to rebuild something. After all, he apologized sincerely, and it seemed genuine. I know a lot of people might say, "Don't trust him," or "Cut him off," but it's ultimately my choice. I also talked with my grandparents, who said they've seen a major shift in Dad's outlook. They're excited at the idea of us reconciling. In truth, I think I want that too. After 2 years of bitterness and anger, I'm ready for a bit of peace. If Dad is truly remorseful, I can at least try to see if we can form a relationship again. So, I decided to give my dad another shot. We're going to start therapy together next week, a counselor who specializes in family issues. I'm hopeful we can dig into all this baggage and figure out how to move forward without letting resentment eat us alive. My grandparents are beyond thrilled. They've always wanted us to patch things up. I don't expect it to be easy, but I'm determined to at least make an honest attempt. As for my ex-stepmom, Tracy, she's out of the picture as far as I'm concerned. After what she did, spreading lies about me and driving a wedge between my dad and me, I see no reason to maintain contact with her. If she wants to redeem herself someday, that's her journey, but I don't need to be part of it. Right now, I'm just relieved that the biggest weight of this drama has been lifted. My father and I still have to work through some serious pain and betrayal, but I have faith in the possibility of healing. Maybe in a few months, I'll be able to say I've got my dad back in my life, and we've managed to put the worst behind us. Only time will tell, but I'm cautiously optimistic.